The Hague. That's a strange name for a city. The Hague? Most people know of The Hague as the home to the International Court of Justice. I'm Veronica Lewis, and today on Let's Go Dutch, we're going hunting for some history in The Hague.
I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been, and I'm gonna share it with you, my friends. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch.
We'll visit the city where the monarchs live and the government governs, and go medieval in the Gothic Knights Hall. We'll hit the beach, and a new word of the day we'll teach. So put on your clogs and let's go Dutch. By train, The Hague is just an hour south of Amsterdam. While Amsterdam is the capital of the Netherlands, the government is in The Hague. The Hague, that's the easy English version. The short, easy Dutch version is Den Haag. Yeah, that's the easy, short version. The long name is... Hey, that's your cue.
Gravenhage.
Sir Gravenhage. And give us the meaning while you're at it, alsjeblieft.
It means the count's hedge. Graaf means count.
And graven is the plural of graaf.
Ja, zeker. And Haag means hedge. This was the count's hedge, and they had their hunting lodge here.
Now, The Hague is associated with the World Court, where they go hunting down animals of another sort. Quite fitting, really.
Sure is. The city grew up around the Count's hunting lodge, and the Binnenhof, where the government now resides, once belonged to the Counts of Holland.
In Den Haag, daar woont een graaf, en zijn zoon heet Jantje. Als je vraagt, waar woon je pa? Dan wijst hij met zijn handje. He's Jantje, which means Little John. In 1296, at the ripe old age of 13, he became Count of Holland, after his father, Floris V, had been assassinated. Unfortunately, just 2 years later, Jantje himself died. Billy, translate the poem for us, alsjeblieft. Alsjeblieft means please.
It's actually a children's song. Don't go asking me to sing. Ik zing niet. Maar zij is wel zangvogel. In Den Haag, daar woont een graaf. There lives a count in The Hague. En zijn zoon heet Jantje. And his son is named Little John. Als je vraagt, waar woont je pa? If you ask him, yo, where does your father live? Dan wijst hij met zijn handje. And he points with his little hand.
He's pointing to the Binnenhof. Dag, Jantje.
In Den Haag woont een graaf en zijn zoon heet Jantje. Als je vraagt waar woon je pa, dan wist hij met zijn handje.
The main attraction in Den Haag is the Binnenhof. It means the inner court. This is a spectacular view of the complex. Vijver is the Dutch word for pond, and this is the Hofvijver, the court pond. Billy's going to help us out on some history here.
In 1229, the Count of Holland was Floris IV. He bought the land next to the Hofvijver in order to build a hunting lodge. After Floris died, his son, Willem II, decided to remodel the lodge into a palace. Now, this was in 1248, but Willem died in 1256 before it was finished. So his son finished it. His son was Floris V.
This is very confusing. So we go from the 4th to the 2nd to the 5th?
William the Silent, also known as William I, he was born much later on in 1533. So now we go from the 4th to the 2nd to the 5th to the 1st.
I'm afraid to ask what comes next.
We'll start our tour of the Binnenhof with the gates, or poorten in Dutch. Along with the Hofweverpaan, the Binnenhof was surrounded by a moat, and the walled complex had several gates. First up, the Stadhouderspoort.
Stadhouder is a word that comes up quite a bit in the history of the Netherlands. In the early Middle Ages, a lord appointed a stadhouder to be his representative of a territory. Because the lord had territory spread out over great distances, he couldn't be everywhere all the time, so the stadhouder ruled in his place. Now this port is the Stadhouderspoort, and from 1634 on, only the stadhouder could enter this port.
This isn't the original port. It's a replica from 1899. The original sits in the garden of Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum. Gevangen means prison. This is the Gevangen port.
Originally, it was one of the gates to the Count's castle, but around 1420, the Count started using it as a prison. Then later, the Court of Holland used it as a prison too.
In 1882, they turned it into a museum of torture and punishment. This gate is my favorite. It's called the Grenadierspoort, also called Mauritspoort. It leads into the first courtyard of the Binnenhof. Before we go on, there are two things I want to point out. First, on my right here, we have the Maurits house.
The house was built by Johan Maurits, Prince of Nassau and Governor of Dutch Brazil. His uncle was none other than Willem the Silent. In 1822, the house became the Royal Cabinet of Paintings. Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring is but one pearl in this stunning collection of the Maurits house. They have Rembrandt's famous anatomy lesson of Dr. Tope. But the one painting that draws me here, Vermeer's View of Delft, painted in 1660. I think we'll just linger here a bit. The detail is just astounding. While some parts of the waterfront have changed, the Oostpoort and the bridge are still intact. And there's the white spire of the new kirk on the Markt.
Next thing I want to point out is this little tower next door.
In fact, it's called Het Torentje, which means the Little Tower. It was built in 1354 as part of the summer house for the Counts of Holland. There was a drawbridge linking it to the garden next door. In 1640, they started building the Maurits house on that spot. Today, the Torentje is the office of the Prime Minister.
Continuing on in, we enter the Binnenpoort. This leads into the main courtyard. This fountain has a bit of history all its own. It's been here since 1885. It was made in Amsterdam. And in 1883, it was in the courtyard of the Rijksmuseum while the museum was under construction.
It was a gift to Den Haag, but the city refused it at first because it cost too much for the water. They resolved this by having the fountain run only on holidays. That's Willem II up on top, checking out the imposing Ridderzaal.
And speaking of checking out the Ridderzaal, Look who's also checking out the Ridderzaal. Billy Eric, what do you daar?
Oh, you know I've just got to paint the Ridderzaal.
That's a lot of bricks, you know.
You're right. That's going to take me forever.
The highlight of the Binnenhof is natuurlijk the Ridderzaal, the Knight's Hall. This is the castle that Willem II had built.
The style is Gothic, and in the 19th century, it became known as the Knight's Hall. There are benches around the Binnenhof. Have a seat and just take it all in for a while. The whole inner court is quite a sight, and you should check it out from all the angles. So what's it like inside the Ridderzaal? Every third Tuesday in September, going back to 1904, the king or queen has presided over the opening of Parliament. In medieval days, it served as a banqueting hall. The walls are adorned with tapestries, and although they are 20th century, they are made in the style of medieval tabards. The tapestries have the coat of arms of Dutch Antilles Islands, plus various treaties and charters from Dutch history.
Zetel van de regering. It means the seat of the government.
Tell them how it refers to the fact that Amsterdam is the capital of the country, but the government is situated here in The Hague.
Like he said.
And tell them, too, how in 1815, when Holland and Belgium became one country, Amsterdam and Brussels alternated as the capital.
Yeah, like he said.
And don't forget to mention that in 1830, when they divided, Amsterdam kept its role as the capital. So that's why the capital and the government aren't in the same place.
You got all that, right? Willem, what's this huisje? Huisje means little house.
It says the Goudsmiths Courthouse. It's the guild house of the gold and the silversmiths dating from 1640. Now here's an interesting tidbit. There's a mistake on the sign. Although it's written in Old Dutch, that's not where the mistake is. The Dutch word for the is het, and when they abbreviate it, it's apostrophe T. Check out that sign. It says T apostrophe. And that, my friends, is improper Dutch.
We're leaving the Binnenhof now, and we're going to first explore the oldest part of Den Haag, centered around the Grote Kerk and the Stadhuis. Outside the Binnenhof is a square called the Buitenhof. Quite fitting, since Buitenhof literally means outside the court. The Buitenhof has lots of choices for eating and drinking.
This grandfatherly building is the old Stadhuis. This is Dutch Renaissance style at its best.
The Stadhuis was built over the 1564 cellar of the Hof van Brederode, who were nobles in the Middle Ages. Additional work was done in 1734 and again in 1883. This kind of Renaissance style is not very typical of the Dutch Stadhuizen, which tend to be more neoclassical or Baroque.
And speaking of Baroque, Den Haag is the capital of Baroque in the Netherlands with all the international embassies.
So instead of step gables or green and white wooden facades, we have Baroque splendor. This street is called Lange Voorhout. Hout means woods and voor means before. This was the long street in front of the woods and was the wealthier part of town. The area around the old Stadhuis was where the commoners lived.
Escher, he was a master of surrealism and illusion. Did you know he was Dutch? He was, and this former palace of Queen Emma now houses the Escher Museum.
Maurits Cornelius Escher was born in Leeuwarden in 1898. The Order of Oranje-Nassau knighted him in 1955. His works are fascinating illusions of architecture, geometry, mathematics, and perspective. Here's an Escher you've probably seen in books. The Escher Museum is an interactive experience set in a classical building with a history all its own. In 1879, at the age of 21, Princess Emma married the 62-year-old King Willem III. His first wife died 2 years earlier, and Emma's two older sisters rejected the aged king. Emma, however, foresaw the possibility of doing great things for the country once Willem died. He passed in just 11 years, and Emma ruled as Queen Regent until her daughter Wilhelmina turned 18. As a young, forward-thinking queen, Emma brought the monarchy of old into the modern age. Her youth and fresh ideas for the country made the monarchy popular till this very day.
By now you're wondering, what's with all the storks around town? Perhaps the word of the day is in order. Our word of the day is Stadswapen. It means the city coat of arms. In Amsterdam, it's 3 X's. In Enkhuizen, it's 3 herrings. In The Hague, it's the stork.
There are 2 theories on the stork. First, the stork was thought to bring good luck. They arrived in the spring, and as we all know, spring has a way of making everyone feel alive again. They nested out on a little island in the Hofwever and other parts of town. There were even curtailed storks roaming freely around the fish market, essentially acting as a cleanup crew. Now, if that's not a good enough reason to put them on the Stadswapen, I don't know what is.
Dank u wel, Willem. Don't let the stork anywhere near the Enkhuizen herrings. Bos is another word for woods or forest. Sometimes it's written in longer form. The Dutch pronounce it Bos, not Bosch. Huis ten Bos. That's the palace that's inside the Haagse Bos.
Frederick Hendrik, son of Willem the Silent, had it built for his wife in 1645. 2 side wings were added in 1733. Since 1981, it has been home to Queen Beatrix, and after her abdication in 2013, to King Willem Alexander. The Huis ten Bos is not open to the public.
So we've seen the palace in the woods. Now what? Well, let's just not ignore this wonderful park, the Haagse Bos. I think you know me by now. Yes, indeed. Great bike ride through the park.
More than just a city park, this wonderful respite from the hustle and bustle of sightseeing is a part of the original forest covering much of Holland. The name Holland itself has its roots in these woods, in fact.
Remember when we talked about the word hout, meaning woods? Well, the Hall of Holland stems from that. Just thought I'd share that with you. Hey, for history buffs, or those who like a free little exhibit, the Verdieping van Nederland. That means the story of the Netherlands. It's inside, sandwiched between Koninklijke Bibliotheek and the Nationaal Archief. It's free and it's right across from Centraal Station.
They have the original peace treaty of Munster, marking the end of the 80 Years' War with Spain, and the sales record of the purchase of Manhattan Island in 1625. Here's a 17th century map of New Amsterdam and its surrounding area. Another important document in the collection, a Vriendschapsverdrag, a friendship agreement between the Dutch Republic and the newly formed America, signed by John Adams in 1782. Adams had earlier been a diplomat in Holland. He was received by the Staten-Generaal in Den Haag in 1782, recognizing him as ambassador of the United States of America. Later on, in 1785, he was posted in London with Den Haag as his second post.
The Vriendschapsverdrag, signed by John Adams in 1782, is America's longest-standing treaty of amity and commerce. And here's another tidbit. John Adams bought himself a house in Den Haag that same year, and that became America's first foreign embassy.
Here's another museum Den Haag has to offer, the Gemeente Museum, the Municipal Museum.
While the Mauritshuis is flush with Dutch masters of old, the Gemeente Museum is home to De Stijl, a Dutch avant-garde movement and also the home of another famous Dutch master, Piet Mondrian. Most major Dutch cities have a fair share of museums, and that counts for Den Haag as well. Close to the Mauritshuis on the east side of the Hofvijver is the Haagse Historisch Museum, housed in the Guild House of the Archers. They have an interesting collection that paints a portrait of the royal city. On the opposite side of the Hofvijver is the Galerij Prince Willem V. In 1773, Willem, stadhouder and Prince of Oranje-Nassau, opened his private gallery to the public, becoming Holland's first public gallery. The entry ticket is combined with the Prison Gate Museum right next door.
Another great museum Den Haag has to offer is the Panorama Mesdag. It's basically just one painting.
One painting, you say?
I say.
I see.
Hendrik Willem Mesdag, along with his wife and two friends, painted this painting of Scheveningen in 1881. Real sand and props help with the illusion. Known for sea and ship paintings, Mesdag completed this painting in 4 months for a competition. It's quite natural to be overwhelmed when you first enter the room. It just takes your breath away. The illusion is so real, you could just step right into it.
Of the Netherlands, what comes to mind?
Windmills, tulips, wooden shoes, cheese, bikes.
How about the beach?
Nay, not the beach.
Have a look behind you.
I do say it looks like the beach.
The beach indeed. This is Scheveningen. And it's only a 15-minute train ride from the center of town.
During World War II, the Dutch used Scheveningen to test for German spies. Although German is extremely similar to the Dutch, Germans couldn't say it, thereby blowing their cover.
Remember we were talking about the Count's Hunting Lodge? Well, this building houses the International World Court. All those despots out there hunted down, they're brought to trial here.
Andrew Carnegie funded most of this building, which opened in 1913. Carnegie was a giant in his time who had this palace built for the grand idea of world peace. Hey, I see you've decided to spend the night. As you can see, the Binnenhof is spectacular at night. Prachtig. That's the Gevanjenpoort.
and natuurlijk the Ridderzaal. Hey, show that moonshot again. I'm gonna have to paint that one. Den Haag is more than just a city of embassies and the World Court. It doesn't take much to peel back a few centuries, revealing a town that to this day was never granted a city charter. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our trek through the woods. I'm Veronica Lewis. Join us again next time on Let's Go Dutch as we explore more of Holland and beyond. Tot ziens!